talk is about the 10 REST commandments. I think it still applies because basically you all are building, at the end of the day, APIs, and the talk is more about how to build an API as a backend developer and still stay friends with the rest of your team. And please note that I bolded REST because we are talking about REST API, so kudos to me. In any case, let's move on. So who am I? Shortly. This is a picture of me. I roughly look the same, just a different shirt. My name is Vedran. I've been a full stack developer for the past 15 years. I actually started with PHP, and I still do PHP on a daily basis. I just moved more to Laravel. I think it's a beautiful framework. I think it allows us to do many things. But before this, I used to run a small, I would say, I hate this word, but it's a boutique development company where we kind of worked a lot on a few smaller projects throughout the year, but we did it all, with PHP and Laravel. And my interests are APIs, Laravel, and performance. And at the moment, I run a startup called Treblle, and we like to say that we're a one-stop shop for APIs. Or just a bit of marketing lingo. We like to, Treblle makes it super easy to understand what's going on with your APIs and the apps that use them. I'm not going to say we're hiring, but we are. So if you are Laravel or PHP developers and love working on big scale projects, just reach out to me. But I know you all guys are very comfortable in your current positions. So when we think about a modern day API, it's important to understand who might use the API that you're building, right? So unlike before, where you guys used to build an API and it would be used by probably like 3 people, and 2 of them were your friends, nowadays you've got more and more people with different roles. So you've got testers and QA teams, other backend developers, native or non-native mobile developers, front-end developers, product and project managers. All of these guys are using an API in one way, shape, or form. Either they're directly interacting with it, or they want data from it, or they're trying to analyze it, or they're trying to understand it, or they're trying to test it. So essentially, when you think about it, many of these roles probably don't have a lot of experience working with APIs. But you're still building for all of these guys. So your API is going to be used and consumed and analyzed by all of these APIs. So that means the API that we're building needs to, kind of be in line with what they know. And that's why we come to the 10 REST commandments. The first one would be practical. And we're going to talk about the basics of how to properly set up your API. The next one is going to be called be methodical. And we're going to explore some of the HTTP request method. Then we have be semantical, where we take a look at some of the best practices about naming endpoints and parameters and structuring your API. They'll make sense to everybody, not just you as a developer. Finally, we're going to talk about securing your API, using some of the most common and most simplest way of actually securing it. Staying organized is going to be a next one. Being consistent, which I think is probably the most important thing which you could do on a REST API. Besides being organized. Finally, the last 3 are going to be about handling errors, predicting errors, understanding how they can happen and how you react to them. Then being smart, and this is something that I would say is newer to APIs, where nowadays APIs handle more and more complexity. So you guys are building a lot more complicated APIs that consume multiple different APIs in the background, and you guys are the ones that are handling all that complexity. So you guys got to be smart about how you do that. Finally, my favorite topic would probably be lean, even though I'm not as lean, but I do like to keep my APIs as lean as possible and as fast as possible. The last one, and this is just mainly philosophical, is going to be about being considerate, and most of all, being considerate to the roles that I've just shown you before. Because like I said, at the end of the day, we are building for everybody that we saw on the previous slide. And as everybody here probably knows, these are just suggestions. These are suggestions based on my experience. REST is not a standard. I cannot make you do these things. It is a loosely, very loosely defined standard schema, which is a part of the problem. So to get into it, let's talk about the first one. It's a very simple one, but a very effective one. But yet a lot of developers actually forget to do this, and that is, imagine just responding with application JSON would actually make your life easier. So not responding with application XML, not responding with text XML, text plain, or any of the other data types that you might be inclined to do, or more importantly, your PHP, in this case, language, might do by default. So if you're going to use JSON, and I hope you are, if by any chance you are planning on using XML or SOAP, I do feel sorry for you. Maybe this talk isn't for you. If there are members here, we can all grouply try to bring you on board to REST JSON-based APIs. But why are we using JSON? It's easier to use, it's easier to write, it's easier to read. Literally anybody can understand JSON, especially if you do a very good job. It's also faster, much faster and easier to consume, uses less memory than XML and everything else. The best thing about it is it doesn't require a single dependency, right? So PHP has this built in. Laravel does a very nice job. Symfony also supports this very well. So believe it or not, just send that header back. You can set some defaults when you're doing it, and your job will be much easier. Next, after an easy one, we're gonna talk about maybe a controversial one, if you will, and that's called be methodical. So as you guys know, we've got a couple of HTTP methods, and I would say God has sent us these methods and has universally translated these methods from China to Germany to United States. Everybody understands what these methods are, so we should use them. We shouldn't respond with get, we shouldn't post data with get, we shouldn't delete data with get and stuff like that. So do as many things as you can with each of these. They all have a meaning. Get is mostly for reading data. I made an article. It just makes sense when you say it, get articles. It means you are actually getting a bunch of articles back from the server. Post is about storing data, and when you're posting something, you're expecting to store something. Put is about updating data. Patch is about updating data also, but unlike put, with patch, you're expected to only patch the things that you need, unlike put, where you send a bunch of things and it just updates everything at once. And finally, delete is, of course, about deleting data. And there's this notion of some of these methods are called safe, and there's a hugely complicated word called idempotent. I don't know if you've probably heard of it, but essentially that means that if you make a request to the same endpoint and it doesn't change anything, it means it's idempotent, right? So there are safe and idempotent methods. I listed which of these methods are safe and destructive or non-destructive. Next up, after that, it's all about being semantical. So this is where a lot of controversy comes from. This is where a lot of confusion comes from, right? Because REST isn't actually a standard. Nobody can make you follow these rules. If you do the thing in red, which clearly states no, bad, you'll still get away with it. You can do that, but you shouldn't be doing that. So if you're designing an API, you should, like I said, first use all the HTTP methods that you have on your disposal, because again, a guy sitting in China understands what you're trying to do. A guy sitting in Croatia also understands what you're trying to do with these. And when you just think about it, as far as naming conventions go, you should always use nouns instead of verbs. Why? Because all of the HTTP methods are actually verbs. So get is a word, post is a verb. So if you say get users, it makes sense. But if you say get users, it doesn't make any sense because you're using a double word. Another thing that you should definitely consider using is plural instead of singular. Why plural? Because you can reuse it in all cases. So if you say get users, you can get users, post users, you can post users. If you were using get user or post user, it would mean that you are trying to get a single user or trying to do something to a single user. So if you start off with plurals, it's just much easier for you later on. Next up, we've got single word instead of multi-word. So instead of using users update or list all users or dashes or whatever, if you need to do it, use a backslash to separate these things, because at the end of the day, you are building APIs and you can go as many depths as you want. An example of that is users /ID /comments. That is better than saying get user comments. So if you go and structure your API at the beginning, you shouldn't have any problems. And finally, this, I really cannot make you use this, but you should consider using snake case. Why? PayPal uses it, Stripe uses it, Facebook uses it. So I know there's a lot of debate between snake case, camel case, all other cases. I think this is the cleanest to read. I actually enjoy reading these. Please don't hate me if you don't use snake case. But this is just my, my honest opinion. Next up, we've got another topic called Be Secure. So essentially, one of the first things that you should definitely do is use HTTPS. So if you're not using HTTPS in 2022, I do feel sorry for you. It is really simple. It is, it doesn't even cost money anymore. Usually, 5 years ago, you'd pay like $500 for an SSL certificate. Nowadays, you can get any API gateway comes with an HTTPS certificate. Any possible server that you might deploy to has an SSH certificate. And when you think about it, it's just something that you should do. Another thing that you should definitely do is use any type of authorization. Any is better than none. Even if you're using a username and password, it doesn't matter. You're still using something. Why? Think of it this way. You have a house. You have an apartment. You have a key to that house. If somebody wants to enter your house, you give him a key or you make him a key. So I suggest you treat the API the same way. You issue a key to somebody, you know who you gave the key, you know who that person is, you know only that person can consume that API, you know that person is a safe person. If you want to take out his privileges, you just take out the key. Trust me, I've been at situations where people haven't been using authorization and have paid a tremendous amount of money to companies like Cloudflare, AWS. I'm talking like 5-digit numbers just to get them past security and secure their API accounts. Another thing, let me just grab a sip of this magical drink. Another important thing in my mind is you should consider using UIDs over IDs, especially in your APIs. I'm not saying you should kick out IDs from your databases. I'm just saying that when you're exposing things over the API, just use UIDs. Again, it's one of those security things. These are very hard, UIDs are very hard to guess. IDs are very easy to guess, of course. And you can nowadays even use third-party plugins to convert an ID to UID or just add one more field to your database and you'll be much, much more safer. When we're talking about security, one of the hottest topics probably nowadays is just going serverless. What that means is you don't have a traditional server. All of the complexity of security and scaling and everything is handled by people who make a living out of securing things, making things run. So AWS Lambda for PHP guys, Bref, Laravel, Vapor, and stuff like that will make your life much, much more easier on that front. Finally, one of the probably overlooked things that maybe some of you don't know is you should definitely clean up your headers. So headers are actually very interesting because you could pull out so much data. At Treblle, we pull out a bunch of data. We, for example, extract the location of the user from headers. We even pull out the details of what iOS version you have installed on your phone from headers, or what Android version you have installed directly from headers. That's how powerful headers are. And what's funny, in Apache, which is what most of us are using if we're not running serverless, by default, you have two configuration options called server signature and server tokens. Now, these two actually expose the version of the PHP you're running on and the version of the Apache you're running on. It's literally an on and off configuration in the Apache config file, And if you turn them off, nobody will know what you're using. If you leave them on, then you're just making it easier for somebody to hack you by exploiting another exploit in the Apache version. And finally, update regularly. I know personally that's sometimes impossible. The other day, Laravel 9 came out. We didn't yet update. We plan to, but that takes time. But of course, try to do that on a regular basis. At least try to patch Apache and try to rotate the keys that you have for logging in to whatever you have regularly. Next one is about being organized, and I kind of simplified this one. Of course, there is code level organization, which I'll leave up to you, and that is totally, a longer conversations, but however you organize your code around APIs is important, of course. But you should also, one thing that I see like 9 out of 10 APIs don't use is versioning. And again, I get the idea. We haven't been using it since day one. It's very complicated. It's very, not just for you as a developer, but also for everybody interacting with it. And you're thinking, okay, if we ever make an update, it's going to be a jump from V1, V2, then we're probably going to spin up another server. It's going to be another endpoint. Trust me, start versioning as soon as possible. If you have an iOS or an Android app, start versioning as soon as possible. You will need to deploy things. You will mess around with your database. If you have versioning, making updates or locking somebody out or in or adjusting the response for one of these things is very easy, because keep in mind, you build an API and you can do a tremendous job, but if the iOS or Android developer wants a strict type of integer and you return a string, it might crash the app. You really depend on the other person doing a good job in terms of integrating. The next one is all about being consistent, and that I'm just gonna give you 2 code examples here of what I think matters. And there's that saying that consistency is what transforms average into excellence, and I think that also applies on APIs. So the first and foremost thing that you should do is be consistent with your models or resources or whatever you want to call them. So if you're returning something, just keep it the same across every single response you have. That means, on a practical example, on the left side, we're getting details for one single article. In that case, we have a bunch of comments right here which are loaded. And sometimes because of eager loading or because you don't want to overload your database, on the articles API input, you just might skip that and not return that. If you are loading an array here, then simply load the array there and just make it empty. You don't have to populate it. You don't have to query the database, but still return that array so that the other person who's getting the data can count on that array being there, because it is a fundamental part of the API structure. Next one is about being graceful, and things fail. That's a given. That's just the name of the game. It's about how you handle things. And again, just like with HTTP methods, somebody has done a really good job at thinking, what are some of the most common ways that we can respond to, and you have at your arsenal. And I see designers made a mistake, 5 different HTTP response codes, or at least 5 categories, right? So you've got informational response codes that start with 1, then XXX. Then you've got success response code. The most famous one is 200 or 2XX. Redirection response code starting with 3, and client error response code starting with 4, and server error response code starting with 5. So the name of the game here is, if you are trying to indicate to somebody that they haven't validated, then use a client error response code, because they've done a bad job, not you. If you messed up and you want to tell somebody, hey, I messed up, if you send a 500, they will understand it. Every client for iOS, for Android, for everything has this error handling built in. You don't have to do anything. You just have to make sure that you're returning this code. I know Laravel has this. It's very easy. Symfony has this. For PHP, okay, you got to do some some messing around, but you can easily do that. And again, just like with the HTTP methods, a guy in Bangladesh, a guy in Africa, and this guy right here, they all understand what's going on with these codes, and you've got a plethora of them. You can use them for every specific reason, everything from validation errors to them being an idiot and not authorizing, which is probably the most common use case that we see. Also, one of the overlooked parts of you as a backend developer, if you will, or a PHP developer, would be trying to predict where others will fail and provide them with as much details as possible. Why as much details? You will just make yourself more free, and you will make your job easier. If you tell your iOS developer, this is the reason why your API requests fail, they're not going to ask you. So unless you want to be stuck providing support, integration support, on endless developer meetings, explaining to other developers what happened, you should just simply tell them exactly what goes on, and you should try to do it in a way that scales. So for example, by that I mean you should try to come up with a unique and continuous, consistent error model that scales. That means if you have one error, you can still handle it from the same model. If you have 50 errors, you still want to be able to handle that with the same response codes. The last one is about being smart, and I kind of touched upon it at the beginning, but essentially what we see at Treblle and what I've personally seen for the past 5 years, the complexity and the things that you guys are handling on the API side is just getting vastly more complicated. So you're not only storing things to a database, you're calling other APIs, you're depending on their responses, you're making transactions, you're connecting to other databases, you're doing a bunch of things that usually you weren't doing. And even in modern data apps, you might be sending an entire JSON that literally controls every part of the app, everything from the design, whether or not to show this button, what the button text is going to be, and so on and so forth. So being smart is about understanding that the API is the brain of the whole operation when you're building an app, a product, or whatever. And that means that your immediate goal in all cases should be to protect your most valuable asset, which is the database. It's your role to kind of protect the database from being hit too hard, from getting bad data in, from getting bad data out, and everything else. That is your primary role, and that is sometimes hard because you will probably get bad data from everywhere, including users, including third-party APIs. But your goal should be to try to sanitize and normalize that data so that at the end of the day, when you're querying your data, you have what you need and not what they gave you. Any good API will actually handle all the complexities and all the processes on its own and won't depend on clients for help. So for example, let's say you're subscribing a user, and let's say you're registering a user, and alongside that you want to send them an SMS message, you want to subscribe them to MailChimp. You shouldn't make that 3 API calls. You shouldn't leave that logic to the client or the app or whoever is handling the integration. You should do that all in one single API call. Why? It's very simple. If your boss comes up tomorrow and says, I don't want to use MailChimp, I don't want to use this, I don't want to use that, I want to use this, you'll be able to fix it. You don't have to go back to the iOS app or the Android app, issue an update, and go through that complexity together. One of the overlooked things is making sure that your API is optimized for cross-platform solutions. So nowadays, you're probably building APIs for Apple Watches, for your mobile phones, for TVs, and you're probably dealing with images, you're probably dealing with trimming texts. So all of those things should have a dynamic component. What I mean by that is you should serve images that are optimized to the platform that you're doing. So for example, you shouldn't send a 5,000 times 5,000 image to an iPhone because that's not something an iPhone can handle. If you have a TV app and you want to send the TV 5,000 times 5,000, yes, then do that. But you should also you should essentially allow the client to be able to tell you, I need an image that is 1,200 pixels and return all the images in that size for that API call. That is the way that you handle that, and that is the way you do it. Similarly, one of the most common use cases is trimming text. So on an iPhone, you might have 1 row of text or 2 rows of text. On an iPad, you might have 5. On a MacBook, you might have 10. You should allow your developer to say, I need X amount of characters, I need X amount of rows, and you should trim that for them. They shouldn't be the ones making those decisions. Why? A new iPhone can come out tomorrow. All of a sudden, it has a bigger screen. It can fit 1 more line of code. You have to issue a code update like this. You don't. Again, we follow this line. The less you depend on the client to do things, the better. Why? Your clients, mainly mobile developers, Android developers, iOS developers, front-end developers, these guys have no idea about databases. These guys have no idea about scaling. These guys have no idea about optimizations. These guys have no idea about anything. I mean, not about anything. Well, they're good at their job, but not at scaling things like you are. So your primary role is essentially trying to make their job as simple as possible and handling all the complexity. The next one is about being lean, and in my opinion, that's just like one of my favorite topics. Is whenever somebody says an API is slow, 9 out of 10, literally 9 out of 10, what we see, it starts on a database level. So you are, can I curse here? So you are fucking up on a database level if your API is slow. Usually, 9 out of 10. There are situations where, yes, your server will be slow. Like, for example, if you're deploying on a Lambda server and you have to warm up a Lambda, et cetera, et cetera. But in most cases, if somebody tells you your API is slow, you need to do a better job on your database. You need to add indexes. You need to add caching. A strong topic for an easy solutions for all your problems in terms of APIs, just add caching. Just cache things. I know Tia is looking at me. She's our iOS developer. She's probably going to be pissed, but just add caching. It'll save you. It'll save your database. Use a time frame that works to your advantage. Even if you cache things for 1 minute on 1 million requests, that is a lot, right? Because you've saved your database 2 million requests if you cached it for a minute. We have at Treblle, we handle 15 million requests per month on our API. If we cache things for 5 minutes, that's like $100 on our AWS bill. So just cache things. Try to make your life easier by using compression methods. There are many of them. The most popular one is gzip. It comes installed by default on Apache. You can use this. I think all you need to do is set a header. There are many more interesting compressions like Broadly and some of the things that Google is doing. One of the probably most overlooked things that I see people kind of use less and less, or at least overlook, is the use of HTTP2. So HTTP2 is by all fronts like 100 times faster than HTTP1 in handling everything from multiple requests to the load times to optimizing network performance. Just use HTTP2 if you can. If you're using HTTP3, then you have my salutes. There is HTTP3. If you take a look at some of the logs that you guys might have, or your analytics, you'll see that Google is already using HTTP3, Cloudflare is already using HTTP3, and again, it is better than HTTP2. And of course, when you're talking about being lean, you can easily plug and play a bunch of solutions. Like if you use any API gateway, they will do a lot of these things for you automatically. And finally, the last one before we end the talk is about being considerate. So we come back to the beginning of this talk and who will be using your API. Who are you building? Of course, in your company, they're going to tell you you're building for a guy named Joe in Kentucky, but that's actually not true. He's not gonna even know you exist. Neither your API exists. You're essentially developing for other people. So essentially, developing APIs for backend developers is a pretty lonely job, and especially at the beginning. But remember, there is a slew of people waiting on you, and depending on you to do a good job. If you don't deliver good documentation, somebody that comes after you will not be able to do their job efficiently. If your API is slow, somebody down the line, a project manager, a product manager, a QA person is going to tell, okay, this API or this app is slow. You're going to be called into a meeting with your app developer, with your API developer, whoever it is you are, and you're going to have to explain why you did a bad job. So essentially, try to understand that there are more players involved here and that you're building something for a multitude of different roles and different people. So that's all for the talk.